We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Hopefully, your day is going well. It is Monday. This is going to be a crazy week. We got a bunch of things happening, which we will talk about. Of course, I'm back home now. Last few days, I'd been in Portland, Maine with my wife celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary. I had a great time. The food was great. The scenery was awesome. The people were very nice. I couldn't ask for a better trip. Uh, I try to do a lot of traveling with my wife. You know, we go to Georgia frequently because we have a place down there. My wife, in fact, is going to Florida on Wednesday. Why? I don't know. Well, I do know. She's got some friends she's going with. Um, but I told her, be careful down there in Florida. Don't tell them you know me because I have a feeling I'm not a favorite down there with anybody that happens to know me. I'm joking about that. My wife will give me shit when I tell a joke like that. Do you think everybody knows who you are wherever we go? And I go, no, of course not. That's not true. And just as soon as I get that kind of shit, the other day, as I mentioned, we're at a restaurant in Portland and a woman walks up and recognized me and thankfully did it in front of my wife. Her name was Samantha. She's on TikTok, and I don't know that she listens to the podcast, but she does watch the TikToks, and for that, I'm very appreciative. Um, there's a lot of people on TikTok that get a lot of followers and they get all ego driven by it. Um, I'll be honest with you, I don't pay as much attention to how many followers that I have as opposed to just trying to create content and then just let it go wherever it's going to go. I'm not trying to do anything that kicks up the audience or I'm not trying to game the system. I'm just doing what I do and seeing where the chips fall. Fortunately, they're falling my way over the last 2 to 3 years. Actually, I have a anniversary on TikTok coming up on November 19th. That will be 3 years doing TikToks, which amazes me. I never imagined I'd be doing that long. I thought I'd just do it, get enough followers, and then do the podcast and get people coming to the podcast. Well, things kept growing, and it's really weird how consistently it's grown. After 1 year doing TikToks, I got up to 100,000 followers or peers. After 2 years, on the date of the anniversary of my starting TikTok, I was at 200,000. And now, as I'm approaching year three, the end of year three, I'm at 287,000. So I'm steadily on track. You see, some people just blow up real quick and real fast. And I have to say, it's always been pretty steady. It never has dropped off. It just kind of keeps growing. And for that, I'm appreciative. Slow and steady, as they say. But it's been a great time on TikTok, and I can't imagine quitting it. It's kind of an outlet for me. It's kind of now. Somebody said to me recently, I bet your wife's appreciative to have you do TikTok so you can get your ranting and raging out on TikTok, and you don't do it to her. Well, you don't know my wife. I don't rant and rage at my wife. In fact, I don't really have a temper at all. And people will say to me when they see a TikTok, they'll say, you got to cool out. You're going to have a heart attack. I really don't get that wired up about things. And if I do, it's only for the moment I'm talking about it. After that, I'm kind of off on some other thought process. So if you see me on TikTok and I seem wired up, I'm maybe for the moment I am, just for the sake of delivering the message, but most days I'm pretty easygoing, calm, collected. I don't yell and scream. I don't get crazy. Certainly not at my wife, because as my wife once told me, something that I've remembered for the 40 years we've been married, she told me, you got to go to sleep eventually. And that keeps me pretty well in check, you know? Anyhow, we're doing the podcast now back here in Minnesota, and we've got some emails to get to, so let's do that. First one comes from somebody by the name of Daytown. I think that's how you pronounce it, spelled Daytowne. He, and I'm presuming it's a he, says, I listen to your podcast every night. I love the information you provide. I have one quick question. Is it true that Donald Trump buried his ex-wife on his golf course in New Jersey to avoid paying taxes? It's true. He did bury his ex-wife on one of his golf courses. And I knew there were some tax implications there, and I'm not sure what it would be. By burying somebody on plot of land, apparently that makes it some tax advantage, and that's so Donald Trump. What I don't understand is she's his ex-wife. Why was he allowed to do that? Well, I'm guessing her kids, Ivanka, Eric, and Don Jr., said it was cool because they'll do anything Daddy says. But Daytown, it's absolutely true. He did bury his wife on a golf course. And if you look at it, it's just some shitty headstone that they're not even keeping up. It's kind of disrespectful, I think. And I don't know why her kids would allow that. But apparently Donnie's very persuasive. And Donnie knows how to game the system. That's why he's going to be going on trial for all of his crimes, and he's currently being sued in New York because of his fraudulent practices. So I don't know if I would trust Donnie at this point for having good ideas. It doesn't sound like he's had many as of late. All right. The next email. Hey, Mike, enjoyed being on the show last week. Looking forward to being on again sometime in the near future. Saw this article on how Biden re-election campaign has more cash on hand than all of the MAGA field combined. What a relief to have a president not having to spend money on defense of criminal actions. This also goes along with an earlier story, how Joe is out fundraising. Trump, just another reason not to believe the polls. People putting their money towards someone is a bigger indicator than so-called unbiased polls. Another reason to stay positive about 2024. Plus, the Republicans ain't doing themselves any favors. So George Santos is threatening to leave Congress if Republicans work with the Democrats on electing a speaker. Well, what a way to sweeten the pot. He may actually be more hated than Lion Ted. Popcorn on order. Jace from Texas. Thank you, Jace. And you're absolutely right. We keep hearing about these polls that say, oh, Donnie and Joe Biden are neck and neck. What we don't know is who put the money behind these polls and who are they in fact talking to. I mean, this is what Republicans do. They love to try to carry the narrative, and they're not afraid of lying to your face in hopes that you'll believe the lie. But if the polls were so close, you would think that people who are offering financial support would be all over Donald Trump or any of the MAGA candidates. But that's clearly not true. Joe Biden and the Democrats are doing far better in fundraising, and that is something to look at when we're talking about the 2024 election upcoming. All right, the next one. Hello, Mike. Thank you very much for doing the podcast, not just on a daily basis during regular times, but also doing it when you're supposed to be enjoying a couple of days off, doing other things such as celebrating your anniversary. Based on 2 TikToks that you recently did, I started wondering what we can do to help Republicans solve some of the serious problems that, due to their incompetence, they're unable to solve on their own. I came up with 2 ideas that I believe is going to solve a couple of priority Republican issues. The first critical issue is regarding the Speaker of the House. Since currently Republicans hold the majority in the House, the Speaker needs to be somebody that fully represents the Republicans, their values, and their conducts. After spending countless hours researching this and how to solve it, I finally came up with the perfect candidate for Republican leadership in the House that is nobody other than George Santos. George truly represents today's Republicans in the House in every form and shape, specifically when it comes to ideology and conduct. Let's hope the Republicans can come to their senses and elect George Santos as the leader so that for a change, they have somebody that they can be fully proud of. I get your point. In fact, George Santos said a couple of things about this Speaker of the House situation. First of all, he was talking about throwing his hat in the ring. that's kind of funny. And then secondly, yesterday or the day before, I'm not sure which, but he said basically what other MAGA have said too. He said that if the Republicans allow the Democrats to help them elect the next Speaker of the House, then he would resign, which is ironic because a bunch of people want him to resign anyway. I think what George is trying to do here, he thinks he can scare the Republicans into voting for Jim Jordan, because if George Santos quits, then their margin is that much slimmer. I don't know that that's going to work, Georgie. I just don't think it is. In fact, we're hearing that Jim Jordan, of course, I thought the election was going to take place today. It's not. It's going to be tomorrow. But there's already 20 to 30 Republicans saying they're going to block this. And for good reason. Jim Jordan is a do-nothing representative. He's never accomplished anything. He's a shit stirrer, and he's nothing but a ignorant bully. So not even Republicans have a taste for having Jim Jordan as Speaker of the House. But it sounds like Jim wants to be the Speaker really bad. Well, good luck, Jim, but you don't have a fucking prayer. Now, the email goes on. The second issue is about the plight of Senator Tim Scott's presidential campaign and his fundraising problems. As you indicated in your TikTok, he may lose donations because of never being married. Well, the solution to his dilemma is very easy. If he marries Senator Lindsey Graham, not only that will solve the not being married status of both of them, but it can bring an end to all speculation regarding these two. It will also create a very powerful front for fundraising for the presidential bid. For his presidential endeavor, Tim Scott will still faces an issue which is fundamental to Republicans in supporting him for office of president, and that is his being black. But in this situation, Tim can point out to his white spouse and telling reputations that they will be running the office as a couple, hence problem solved. Let me know what your thoughts are about the two pressing Republican issues. Thank you again for everything you do to keep us informed and entertained. Regards, Joe. Well, Joe, you seem to sound like a bit of a smartass, maybe a little sarcastic. And for some people, that might be a negative, but for a guy like me who has those same traits, I think it's fucking awesome. So thanks for your comments. Obviously, they're tongue in cheek, but these are real problems for the Republican Party. If Jim Jordan is their man they want to elect as Speaker of the House, they're in trouble because he will not get the votes to be voted Speaker of the House. There is no Democrats that would vote for Jim Jordan just by virtue of who he fucking is and all the horrific things he's done. I wouldn't be surprised if we heard Jim Jordan talk about unifying and dealing in bipartisan situations. Now, after never having a Republican vote for any Democratic bill, even if it's one they liked, now they want to be bipartisan now that they need bipartisanship. Well, it's not going to happen that way. Not with Jim Jordan anyway. Jim Jordan has a lot of baggage coming with him, and none of it is good. None of it's good. Jim Jordan doesn't have a chance in hell of being Speaker of the House. Tim Jordan, he has no chance of being President of the United States. Now, the idea of he and Lindsey getting married, that's not so crazy when you think about it, because they're both from South Carolina. They're probably from different parts of the state, but at least from the same state. The thing is, Lindsay's kind of old. We've got Tim Scott, much younger. I mean, unless he was looking at Lindsay as a sugar daddy, that's a possibility. I doubt those two are going to get together. I don't think their policies are similar. I think Tim Scott is a weak ass politician. He flip flops constantly, and you don't know what he really believes. He will say anything to garner votes and money. Well, now come to think of it, so will Lindsey Graham. So maybe they would be a good pair. We'll see if that pans out. I have a feeling, Joe, that that's not something we're going to have to worry about. All right, the next email. Hi, Mike. Happy anniversary. I hope you had a good trip. Thanks for doing the podcast, even when you're on vacation. And thanks to all your guests. I really enjoyed listening. Yeah, about that. I don't know. Some people are trying to shame me here. You're supposed to be on your anniversary trip. Why are you still doing the podcast? Well, you have to understand when I do the podcast, my wife is typically asleep by then. I can't get to sleep till later or earlier in the morning. So that's when I do the TikToks or do the podcast. I do TikToks then sometimes too, but rarely. But that's when I do the podcast. So that's why I continued to do it. And, you know, it's, I feel a responsibility to doing it. Even if I know one person out there is counting on it being there in the morning when they wake up, I feel like I need to do it. So that's why I do it. My wife understands the situation and she doesn't give me a hard time about it. And I will tell you, during the day when we're together, we really don't focus on podcasts or TikToks. That's why you probably have seen fewer TikToks from me the last couple of days. But typically, what I do with TikToks, my wife will know that I'm going to need to do it. And by the time I'm up in the morning, I kind of figure out some stories, and then I work the TikToks out in my head. And she'll say, "How much time do you need?" I'll say an hour, and then I'll go someplace or sit here where I'm sitting now, and I'll just do the TikToks. It's not like a long, drawn out affair. If I know what I'm talking about, I can get 3 or 4 TikToks done in about an hour. Anyway, the email goes on. I particularly want to add to what you and Eric were talking about regarding the Republican Party becoming more moderate over the next years, which I agree that in order for it to be viable and survive, it does need to be more moderate. I think this will only happen if Republican politicians become more truthful and present facts to their voters instead of the lies, hate, and division that they've been offering for years. And that's a big ask because they've been doing the opposite of that for such a long time. Now, these lies have radicalized their voters in a sense that they are electing candidates that represent this hatred and lies, like the Freedom Caucus crazies and people like Ted Cruz and Tommy Tuberville. These awful politicians will keep getting reelected because they've sown so much hatred and lies that their voters believe in it and want to own the libs no matter what, even when it's hurting them and the country. The corporate media, except for a very few individuals, does nothing to call out lies and call out these politicians. They've installed so much fear in people that my neighbor looked at me with tears in their eyes and said to me, "They don't know who they're letting in our country at the border. And I'm fearful we're going to have another 9/11. Don't worry about who's coming in the border. Let's worry about the wolves in the hen house, as it were, meaning the Republican Party." Email goes on and says, "I just had to walk away because I knew whatever I was going to say, it wouldn't make a difference. It's come from their Republican leaders. They need to stand up and do the right thing. And our Democratic leaders need to be loud and proud of our policies. They also need to tell the people that we don't have open borders and we have a process that granted does need to be fixed, but we do vet people and don't just let anyone in. Borders are not just open, never have been just open. And the people who say that are doing a disservice to this country. and the people down there working at the border. The emailer says both parties need to stand up and tell people the truth, no matter who doesn't like it. Well, that's easy enough for the Democrats, but of course the Republicans have a little trouble with that. And this leads me to the other part of my email to talk about how the right-wing media and Republicans are treating Joe Biden and his response to the attack by Hamas on Israel. They're treating Biden as the attacker himself. I'm appalled how unpatriotic they are. They're hurting this country with this rhetoric. And you have to understand, Joe Biden is in a situation, a no-win situation. If he does nothing, they're going to say he's a coward. If he does something, then they're going to say he's a killer. That's just how the Republicans do things. Don't ever expect to get any positive feedback from a Republican when it comes to Joe Biden or any other or Democratic politicians. Continuing with the email, I'll say this, Mike. I can't tell you how lucky us Americans are living in this country and having the freedoms we have, regardless of how the Republicans want to take them away. I'm like you. I know we will take them back and this country will be on track once again. But in the meantime, I want people to realize they are blessed to be in a country like this and should support it when there are outside forces that are so evil and wish us ill. I was born in Iraq under the Saddam regime. We were always terrified if we said or did anything wrong that we'd be punished for it. That's like being in Florida. Yeah, we've got kind of an Iraq situation in Florida. My parents were able to get us out during the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s. And granted, I was just a young kid at the time, but my oldest siblings remember the bombings and living through war. And trust me, no one wants to live through that. It's ugly, scary, and terrifying. So when I hear people here calling for violence and civil war in this country, it makes me sick to my stomach. As Americans, we stand with peace, and I know the world is complicated and we may not like some outcomes, but we just do our best locally to do the right thing. Thank you, V or Viv. Now, it's been a while since we heard from Viv, but thank you very much, and you make some excellent points. It's funny that there are some people in the Republican Party that would love nothing more than to have a fascist regime like the one you talked about with Saddam in Iraq. And you have to understand why they are for this. It seems ironic that a Republican would want something like this. Well, the Republicans are understanding that they're losing their grip on power. Every day, it gets worse and worse for them. Every day, we've got young people coming of age and they'll be voting. In 2024, they'll have a big impact. In 2028, the millennials and the Gen Zs will be the majority. And then the Republican Party is done. Instead of trying to change things up and appeal to these new voters, they instead try to scrape and scramble to maintain what they have. They don't want to change and they want to keep getting votes, but it's not going to happen. Through attrition, they will lose their grip and they will lose their power, and they will have a choice. Do we change it up, try to create a different Republican Party, or keep trying to do what they've been doing for the last 6 years? It's not working now, and it's going to work even less as time goes on. Republicans aren't the brightest folks in the world, and they love to double, triple, and quadruple down. So I don't expect them to change for a while. I do expect that after the 2024 election, when there is a blue wave, that's when, and only then, will we see any kind of change or stepping away from Donald Trump happening with the Republicans. All right, this last email comes to us from Max. Had a feeling I'd hear back from Max. Mike, you asked me if I agreed that there are many former hippies. Remember, he was mad because he thought I may have disparaged the hippies, and I really didn't. But he says, you asked me if I agreed that there are many former hippies who are greedy in everything non-hippie or something like that. My answer is unfortunately yes. I estimate that there's anywhere between a third to a half of the people I know became yuppies. Another reference that unless you're old, um, you don't know what we're talking about. And it had to do with young, upwardly mobile, whatever. It meant the young people that were getting into the greed game that are currently elder folks now and still of that mindset, a mindset that would put them in the Republican Party. Max goes on to say, I've been in the human services for all of my career, so I've escaped the fighting for extreme wealth. It is my opinion that the extremely wealthy began the process of brainwashing the people at the same time Reagan started his bullshit. I'm hoping that we as a society is going back to hippie ways. Max. I don't know that we'll see what we saw in the days of the 60s and 70s with the hippies. It will be different. The young people of today, the millennials and the Gen Z, are far different people than the hippies were. I mean, just by virtue of technology, we've got young people that are better informed and better at organizing. Now, that said, the hippies of the 60s and 70s were pretty good at organizing too. As I've said, their protest, some got kind of violent. It was not a pretty sight back in the 60s, but their efforts to protest the war was a big reason why the war ended. And I'm talking about Vietnam. There was really no sense to go into Vietnam. A lot of people said it back in the day. And of course, the older folks and the military folks said that was gutless or treasonous when they said that. But now, these many years after it's been over for a long time, I think most people agree that it made no sense. We were worried about the communists coming from North Vietnam into South Vietnam. We wanted to protect South Vietnam. We fought that war for a long time, and then we bailed, and we really accomplished nothing. We essentially lost that war because the objective we were going on at was never realized. When you say there are hippies that are now bad people, like I suggested, that's not an issue of the culture of hippies. That's just the nature of men. And when I say men, I mean men and women. It's one thing when you're young and you have nothing and you're hoping for better for your country. But then when you get a little older and you start getting some things, accumulating property, accumulating money, now you're in a different mental state. It's now protecting that and whatever it takes. At that point, if you're for the trickle down theory, it's because you somehow want to rationalize that you want to keep all your money. And the trickle down theory is one way to explain it. Now, we've dealt with this for 40 years and we know the trickle down theory doesn't work. So you would think these wealthy people, these successful people would have come up with a better excuse. But it's a testament of how many stupid people we have in this country because some people still buy into it. You can talk to Republicans all day. They don't have a problem with giving wealthy people a tax credit or tax break of $2 trillion. But they don't want to spend $50 billion helping the middle class or poor people or children or anything like that. They know in their hearts what is right. They know in their hearts what is true, but it works against them, at least in their minds, because they're only thinking about themselves and their own agenda. And this is what people do, not just wealthy people, not just politicians. If you've ever been in a situation where you loan somebody money, an associate or a friend, and this friend or associate doesn't have the wherewithal to pay you back in the time frame they claimed. They were desperate at the moment and they would tell you anything. And then later, when you came to that date when they were supposed to pay you back, what did they do? Well, 9 times out of 10, they couldn't pay you back because they didn't have the money. But they didn't approach you about that. They just kind of hid from you or ducked you or whatever. But when you finally do talk to them, what happens? They get mad at you, which is ironic. You borrowed them the money. They told you when they were going to pay you back. They don't pay you back, and you call them out on it, which you should, and they get mad at you. And they come up with reasons why they haven't paid and how it's your fault. And see, that's what people do. People are selfish by nature. Not all people, but a lot of people. And they will rationalize everything. I mean, it's like the brown people coming across the border. They hear that these are all criminals coming across the border, and in their mind, that seems to make sense. So they heard it once, they rationalize that that must be true. The whole point of the border thing for Republicans is just trying to find something, find anything that they can try to own the libtards with or own Joe Biden with. It's not working. It hasn't worked. The problem at the border has been a problem for decades and decades. The borders are not open in spite of what they say. But the people who believe in that agenda hear it one time, and in their minds, it's true. I see this on TikTok a lot. I know a lot of creators, and I do it too, but I'm a little more careful about it. A lot of creators will watch what's on TikTok and they'll hear somebody say XYZ news story. And then they'll immediately repeat it because they assume it's real. Well, if you've been on TikTok for any length of time, you know there's a lot of bullshit going on out there, so you can't trust that. But they will be lazy about it. They'll see it and they'll go, oh, that sounds good. And then they'll do their take on it. And then later they have to come back and say, oops, I guess that was not true. That was a conspiracy theory. And they embarrass themselves when they do it. If I see a story like that, I go, well, that's interesting. If it's true, it could be cool, but I'm not seeing it anywhere else. A story that might catch my attention would be reported in any number of publications. So you check those publications. And if there is nothing about it, then you stay away from it. You don't try to rationalize just because I want to do a cool TikTok about it. It's got to be the truth. Because if I'm not giving you the truth, I'm doing nobody any good. And unfortunately, some creators just think, well, this is hot. This is sensational. I'm going to spill it, and that'll get me more followers. And therein lies the problem with TikTok. And the same thing with our media, because they have that same attitude. If I sat across the table from one of the media stars and say, you said this, but you didn't tell them the whole story, they wouldn't say to me, yeah, Mike, you're right. I need to change my ways. What they would instead do is rationalize it out and bullshit their way around it. Nobody ever admits they're wrong. Nobody ever admits they're wrong. And that is one of the problems because there are many people that are wrong. I'm wrong frequently. And if I'm wrong here on the podcast or TikToks and I know it, I will be the first one to come say, oh, I fucked up. Disregard that. Here's the real story. But people largely don't do that. You know, whether you're buying a used car or whether you're listening to a U.S. senator, they will tell you what's beneficial to them and omit anything that might work against them. And if it works against them, then it's going to work against you. You're going to get lied to or just not told about something, and you're going to pay the price for it. And it's time that we stop that shit. It would be nice if we could get more people with more credibility and focus on being honest as opposed to the bullshit they do. All right, we will take a quick break and we will be right back. Well, there's a lot of things coming up this week, interesting things. We've got the continuation of the lawsuit against Donald Trump by Letitia James. Michael Cohen's going to testify, and we hear Donald Trump is coming back. On Tuesday, they're hoping to vote Jim Jordan in as Speaker of the House. We both know it's not going to work, and they are still going to continue to shuffle their feet trying to come up with a Speaker of the House, which is kind of at a pressure time. We've got a lot of things that need to be dealt with, and without a Speaker of the House, they're not going to be able to deal with them. Ultimately, the Republicans will have to coordinate with the Democrats. That's the only way they're going to get something done, because even though they have the majority in the House, they're a divided party, so they don't really have the majority. Somebody said something to me, and I said, here's the deal. People are saying, well, maybe the Republicans will negotiate with the Democrats, and then Hakeem Jeffries will be the Speaker of the House. And I said that'll never happen because the Republicans won't vote for Hakeem Jeffries. And that's true. And I stand by that. There is going to be no Republicans voting for Hakeem Jeffries. That would be political suicide for anybody to do that. But then somebody brought something to my attention that I didn't think about. And the Republicans wouldn't have to vote for Hakeem Jeffries in order for him to become Speaker of the House. It would still take them doing something, and they still could be held responsible for it, but it would be kind of indirect. You know what I mean? So here's the scenario that some people are talking about. Jim Jordan, okay? Jim Jordan is calling for a quick vote to name him Speaker of the House, and it's not going to work. Now, Jim Jordan wants to do it in public so that he can kind of force people's hands, because some people would be afraid that MAGA will come after them if they vote against Jim Jordan. So Jim thinks he's being really smart by pushing this and making sure that they do the vote in public. But somebody came up with a different theory that actually kind of makes sense. Now, if people are too afraid to vote against Jim Jordan, what if they just don't vote? Now, you're probably saying to yourself, what would that help? Well, it wouldn't get him elected, certainly. But think about this, and I don't know that this is totally true. I still have yet to look into it. But what some people are saying is that some of these Republican representatives may choose just not to vote. And if they choose not to vote, that limits the number that somebody has to receive in order to be elected Speaker of the House. So right now it's at 217 votes necessary to elect a Speaker. But if, say, 10 or 12 Republicans just decided not to vote because they don't want to play their hand, guess what happens then? The number that you need to be elected Speaker of the House would be like 212 or 211 or something like that. Well, here's the deal. Even if these people don't vote and they drop the level down to 212 votes, say, the Republicans are still not going to be able to come together enough to get those 212 votes. Hell, we know Jim Jordan is like 40 or 60 votes away from even coming close to being voted Speaker of the House. But if some of them decide not to vote, and the amount of votes necessary to be elected Speaker of the House is dropped to 212, guess what? In these votes, who are the Democrats voting for? They're going to vote for Hakeem Jeffries, regardless of what the Republicans put up. Now, the problem is the Democrats only have, get this, 212 votes. So if enough Republicans don't vote, drops the level down to 2000 or 212, that means the Democrats could theoretically elect Hakeem Jeffries. I hadn't thought about that, but that's interesting. And we'll see if that happens. I doubt it. I really doubt it. I don't think the Republicans would allow that to happen. But hopefully, when it's all said and done, we do get a Speaker of the House and we do get somebody that is of a reasonable mind and doesn't want to fuck around with impeachments that don't mean anything without evidence or witnesses. And we can focus on the things at hand that are important, like Israel and Hamas, and like Ukraine and Russia, and like our own budget here in the United States. And we'll talk more about that stuff. But the real big story out there today is, in fact, this war in the Gaza Strip. And I got thinking about that. And here's what you need to understand about this war. First of all, you have Israel and you have Hamas, and they've been at loggerheads for some time. And even Israel and the Palestinians. But we're talking about three entities here. We're talking about Israel. We're talking about Hamas, which is a terrorist organization that deserves to be wiped off this planet. But then you have the Palestinian people who are innocents in this whole situation. Hamas attacks Israel, Israel attacks Gaza, and then a bunch of innocent people are caught up as collateral damage. What you need to understand is that these wars are created by old men, old women, and governments. The only people that suffer in these circumstances happen to be innocent men and women and children. They pay the price for these ego trips that these government entities are engaging in. But the real question here is something that came up yesterday, I believe. Israel is mad at hell at Hamas. They attacked their cities. They killed their people. They killed their children. It was barbaric. It is barbaric even at this moment. So naturally, Israel's mad. And Israel wants to wipe Hamas off the planet. I get that. So now what they're talking about doing is making a ground attack with some 300,000 troops. Well, that'll be pretty devastating. And it's pretty surprising that Hamas would go after Israel knowing how great a force the Israeli military is. So why did that happen? How did that happen? What were they thinking? Now, as I've said, when it comes to these wars, it's the innocent folks that pay the price, the innocent folks and children and women that end up dying because of these government entities. But how did this all start? Did Hamas say, you know, we don't have a prayer in hell, let's just attack Israel? And I don't think so. Because now we're hearing from Iran saying, listen, Israel, if you go in on ground troops of 300,000 people, then we're going to get involved. And of course, if Iran gets involved, then we're getting involved. But here's the interesting thing. Who's the likely candidate to be involved in something like this, but they're not? Russia. Russia's sitting back there smirking like they're sitting in the catbird seat, just watching what happens. You don't hear them talking too much about it, which I find interesting. And it goes back to what we've talked about before, in that we know Donald Trump gave up some Israeli military information to spies in Russia. Now, Hamas can't do what they're doing alone. So they have to look to Iran. And Iran is supported completely by Russia. Or maybe Russia is just going directly to Hamas. But this war may not be as much about the issues that these two entities have had for decades and decades. It's maybe more of a gambit by Russia. And as I've told you before, the reason why Russia would want to do something like this is twofold. With the Israeli war going on with Hamas, it's reasonable to think that the United States would fund Israel. No doubt that's what we would do. Now, theoretically, they're thinking they would take money from Ukraine and give it to Israel, which makes it a much easier situation for the Russians. The Russians are getting their ass kicked by Ukraine, and that's largely due to NATO countries offering up money and weapons and ammunition and that sort of thing. So, in that sense, he's hoping to drain some of the money off of what Ukraine is getting. Secondly, it's a distraction. This has not been good publicity for Vladimir Putin internationally, or even within his own country, because he's not showing big wins or getting this over with. We know that he talked about wrapping this war up in 3 days, and now it's gone on for almost a couple of years. So he's feeling some pressure. He needs to change the situation. Again, people might say what I'm suggesting is a conspiracy theory, but the front part of this makes no sense. Hamas attacking Israel. There's no comparison between the two. Israel's mad and they are going to wipe out Hamas if they can get away with it. Unfortunately, there'll be a lot of innocent people hurt or killed in the process. And then Iran says, I'm going to step in if you send those ground troops in. Why would Iran do that? Because they don't like Israel. Maybe this is all a setup to nail Israel somehow. But again, we've got Russia in the background saying nothing. And we know we know for a fact, people have said I'm lying about this, but it's not true. There at least one occasion where we know for a fact that Donald Trump gave Israeli military information to Russian spies. And that was in the Oval Office shortly after being inaugurated. He inadvertently gave away some top secret information. And of course, everybody said, oh, give him a chance. He's just new at this. He just made a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes. Fuck that. There was more to this ploy than just a simple mistake. So we know on that day in January 2017, Donald Trump, in fact, gave Israeli military information to Russia. And what Russia did with it after that, God only knows. But we can presume now he gave it to Iran, who gave it to Hamas, or they gave it directly to Hamas. I don't know. But none of this could have happened unless there were some special circumstances for Hamas. There's no way they'd wade into a war like this knowing they're going to get their ass kicked. Unless, of course, Iran steps in to push back against the Israelis. There's too much to this story not to give it some thought. I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. I think when you look at all the things that we know for a fact Donald Trump did, if we did not have the evidence, you would say it's a conspiracy theory. The stealing of documents, the inciting of insurrectionists. If we had no proof of it, it might be considered a conspiracy theory. But we know the things that Donald Trump has done has been quite appalling, and I wouldn't put it past him in this circumstance as well. Now, while this war is going on, there's a lot of there's atrocities going on, and there's a lot of Israelis and Palestinian folks that are struggling right now like they've never struggled before. We're hearing now that water has run out at UN shelters across Gaza as thousands packed into the courtyard of the besieged territory's largest hospital as a refuge of last resort from a looming Israeli ground offensive. And overwhelmed doctors are struggling to care for all the patients they fear will die once generators run out of fuel. See, it's not just the artillery fire. It's the resources that will be taken away, electricity, water, and other things. You can't expect people to survive in those conditions. It'll be like what happened in Texas when the grid failed, but 10 times worse, and while people are shooting at you. So It's a horrible mess there. Palestinian civilians across Gaza already battered by the years of conflict. This is, as I've said, been going on for decades. They were struggling for survival Sunday in the face of an unprecedented Israeli operation against the territory following a Hamas militant attack on October 7th that killed 1,300 Israelis, most of them civilians. See what I mean? There's just innocents on both sides. Palestinians, Israelis, a bunch of kids, women, families are being killed, and they don't have a dog in this fight. They don't want this fight, but some egomaniacal politicians do, and so they are sacrificed. Now, Israel has cut off the flow of food, medicine, water, and electricity to Gaza. They pounded neighborhoods with airstrikes and told the estimated 1 million residents of the north to flee south ahead of Israel's planned attack. The Gaza Health Ministry said more than 2,300 Palestinians have been killed since the fighting started last weekend. Now, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told CNN on Sunday that Israeli officers told him that they had turned the water back on in South Gaza. Israel's Minister of Energy and Water, Israel Katz, said that in a statement that water had been restored at a specific point in Gaza, but did not give further details. Aid workers in Gaza said they had not yet seen evidence the water was back, and Gaza government spokesman said it was not flowing. You can imagine when you have 1 million people not being able to get electricity or water or any of the resources, they aren't going to last long doing that. Over and above the shelling, we're going to have people dying of dehydration, dying of needing some kind of medical care. And I'm not just talking about ammunition wounds. I'm talking about just normal things. Maybe they have diabetes. Maybe they're epileptic. Maybe they've got pneumonia, whatever. If they don't have medical care, these people are potentially going to die as well. Relief groups called for the protection of the over 2 million civilians in Gaza, urging an emergency corridor be established for the transfer of humanitarian aid. Now, Dr. Mohammed Quandil said this: the difference with this escalation is we don't have medical aid coming in from outside. The border is closed, electricity is off, and this constitutes a high danger for our patients. Now, doctors in the evacuation zone said they couldn't relocate their patients safely, so they decided to stay as well to care for them. Some brave folks. Now, Dr. Hussam Abu Safia said this: we shall not evacuate the hospital, even if it cost us our lives, he said. Imagine that. That's a distinct amount of bravery, sacrificing or risking the sacrificing of your own life just to help folks in need. And there are a lot of people in need, and it's overwhelming for them. Sophia said that the hospitals are full. The wounded stream in every day with severed limbs and life-threatening injuries, he said. Other doctors feared for their lives of patients dependent on ventilators and those suffering from complex blast wounds needing around-the-clock care. Doctors worried entire hospital facilities would be shut down and many would die as the last of the fuel stocks powering their generators came close to running out. United Nations humanitarian monitors estimated this could happen by today. And then the shit will hit the fan. It's not bad enough that we have a war going on and people shooting at one another. If people can't get the simple care that they need to survive, then what will happen? Well, they'll die. At Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, the heart of the evacuation zone, medical officials estimated at least 35,000 men and women and children crammed into the large open grounds in the lobby and in the hallways, hoping the location would give them protection from the fighting. Their situation is very difficult. Hospital director Mohammed Abu Selmiya said. This is quickly becoming a hotbed of atrocities. And what's being done? Well, America is not doing anything yet. Joe Biden is trying to do whatever he can, but we do need the House of Representatives to step up. And they can't as long as they don't have a Speaker of the House. Now, as I said, Jim Jordan's trying to be the next Speaker of the House. And is running into considerable amount of resistance from his own GOP caucus. So allies of the Ohio Republican are reportedly twisting arms and making threats to ensure his selection. According to a report from the New York Times, Republican House members who are balking at falling in line are being threatened with retribution and are already on the receiving end of harassment being fostered by supporters of Jordan. There's got to come a time when these people realize enough is enough. We can't let them continue to control our caucus. We've got to push back on it. And that goes back to what I've said before. Maybe some of them choose not to vote. Not to put their name on the dotted line saying they voted against Jim Jordan, if that's what they're afraid of. And the fact of the matter is can you imagine being voted Speaker of the House because you had to coerce a bunch of people to vote for you? That really doesn't offer much in terms of credibility in being elected. Now, with one ally admitting that Jordan camp was stunned that he didn't get close to the 217 votes needed to become Speaker, not even close. The New York Times is reporting that fans of the blustery Ohio Republican are using this weekend to sick their own followers on House members that are balking at electing Jim Jordan, calling it an extraordinary instance of Republican on Republican fighting. Several of Mr. Jordan's supporters have posted the phone numbers of mainstream GOP lawmakers they count as holdouts, encouraging followers to flood the Capitol switchboard with calls demanding they back Mr. Jordan. You know, it's almost like what Donald Trump and some of the others did to those election workers down in Georgia. They sicked the red meat eating, toothless, dumb motherfuckers on these people to coerce or to pressure them into doing their bidding. It says a lot about the Republican Party. And do we really want that kind of group? Do we want that kind of person who has to go to that extent to get elected to be in charge of anything? Now, as I told you earlier, there are multiple outlets. They're reporting that Jim Jordan, the current favorite to become the House Speaker, and he's not really a favorite, they're pushing for this quick floor vote to build momentum for his candidacy. Now, you have to understand, when he got the nomination, it was done behind closed doors, and it was an anonymous vote. You just took the votes. You didn't have a name attached to the votes. That may be why some people felt so strongly about voting against Jim Jordan. They weren't going to pay the price of Donald Trump's wrath or just the Trump-lefucks in general. So Jim Jordan thinks if they put it on the floor in front of everybody and makes everybody's name be known as to how they voted, that might be pressure. That might be coercion enough to get them to vote for him. The most ironic thing about this whole situation is that it's Republicans doing it to themselves. This is a time they should be thinking about the primaries and getting a good candidate to run in 2024. They're running out of money because nobody wants to give them any money because they know they're going to lose. And they're spending all this time fighting amongst themselves. You got to believe the Democrats are sitting back going, let them implode, let them kill themselves. But they have the problem that there are people in need of decisions coming out of the House of Representatives. So the Democrats are kind of caught in a tight spot too. Now, according to CNN, Punchbowl News, and others, Jordan is pressing for a floor vote in order to put his House Republican colleagues on the record. CNN's Manu Raju reports a senior House Republican told him at least 20 members of the caucus are a hard no on Jordan, and Punchbowl's Jake Sherman report as many as 55 won't vote for the Ohio congressman. Still, Jordan wants the public to see where things stand. And we know what happens to Jim Jordan when he tries to grandstand like this. He always looks fucking stupid. He always looks stupid. Now, 10 days ago, Jordan's attitude was a lot different than it is now. He told Sean Hannity that he thought the House Republicans should already have a speaker chosen before they proceed to the floor, citing the drama surrounding the speaker election in January when Representative Kevin McCarthy needed 15 votes in order to claim the job. So 10 days ago, Jim Jordan said, yeah, let's do this behind closed doors and let's get a Speaker of the House elected and not bring it to the floor until we know that we're going to get somebody elected. Somebody's going to get the 217 votes. Now he's got a whole different attitude about this thing, largely because he's now the candidate. He wants to put it out in public so that he can pressure his fellow Republicans into voting for him. It's amazing how low these people will stoop just to get what they want. They have no problem with cheating or lying or bullying to get what they want. Is this really the kind of people that we want representing us, let alone leading us? I don't think so. And I don't think a public vote is going to stop people from not voting for Jim Jordan. I think people understand, Republicans understand, reasonable-minded Republicans understand that having Jim Jordan as Speaker of the House would be absolutely disastrous. Now, you talk about desperation. We've talked about Mike Lindell before. We've talked about Peter Navarro. These guys are in desperate situations. They have big court cases ahead of them, and they have no money. They're all broke. Now, disgraced former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, get this, auctioned off a MyPillow cushion signed by Mike Lindell in order to benefit former Trump advisor Peter Navarro's legal fund. How much do you expect you're going to get for that? Nobody likes the pillows. Nobody likes Mike Lindell. So you're going to have him sell one of these mattresses or pillows at auction, hoping to gain money for Peter Navarro. Pete, if you were expecting a windfall from this, I wouldn't count on it. The auction occurred over the weekend at the Reawaken America tour in Miami, where an audience was instructed to write their names on U.S. currency. Now, Flynn said, so when Mike was here yesterday, he showed the pillow up here. But what he did was he signed it, dated it. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to do a fundraiser tithing drill here, and you have to write your name down on a bill. You drop it in a bag, and then once you're done, we're going to pull it, and you're going to get this. This is the Type 2.0. I should give a commercial for my Giza something, and it's signed by Mike Lindell. It'll extend your life by at least 2 years. Oh, really? You get a MyPillow from Mike Lindell and you'll get an extra 2 years of life. I'd like to see the the study on that one. The pillow was eventually awarded to a woman named Karen, of course, who asked Navarro what job he would have in the next Trump administration. And you know what Navarro said? I want to prosecute Fauci. Well, there you go. Good job. Navarro, I don't think you have to worry about getting another job because you'll be in an institution that is provided to you by the U.S. government. You'll get 3 hots and a cot, and that's about it. And you won't be you won't be charging anybody or prosecuting anybody for anything. You're the only motherfucker. You and your buddies are the ones that are going to get prosecuted. Can you imagine that? How much do you think you got for a My Pillow pillow signed by Mike Lindell? Hell, when he first started this, before his company was a lost cause, before he was completely broke because of all his legal problems, you still probably wouldn't have got more than $50 because I think that's what he was selling the pillows for at about that time. His autograph is worth nothing. A former meth addict or crackhead who got lucky, had a successful business, and then flushed it all down the toilet. How much is his autograph worth? My God, if someone showed me, look what I got a pillow, a My Pillow signed by Mike Lindell, I would laugh at them. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I guess it's appropriate that the woman who bought it was named Karen. That sounds like a good name for a Republican or a Trumplafuck, if you will. All right, we are going to wrap up the Rational Boomer podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope you have a great day and get ready. This week's going to be a wild one, and we'll be here for you each and every day. So have a great day. We will talk to you again tomorrow.